Welcome back to the Act Two podcast, a podcast for the real-life working screenwriter. I'm Tasha Hugh.
And I am Josh Hallman.
As a reminder, Act Two is a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter, of which this podcast is just one of the things that we do. We will soon, in fact, be announcing the date of our next Act Two event.
Yes.
Which will be open to the public. So even if you're not officially in Act Two, you are welcome to come. So subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on that announcement. You can also DM us with questions, topic suggestions. We've also had people recently just writing us to say, hey, I'm also struggling with writing a spec. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So you can also do that. And you reach out to us at ActTwoWriters@gmail.com, all spelled out, or on our Instagram and Twitter and Threads at ActTwoWriters.
Threads is dead, man. It's gone.
Dead. I hate that. Okay. Today, we are doing a breakdown of the opening of Spider-Verse Across the Universe. But first, This Week in Writing.
This Week in Writing.
I have a couple things.
Okay.
I was recently in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
I watched a little bit of War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise.
Okay.
Have you seen it?
Yes.
Okay. I actually had this feeling that you hadn't seen it.
And
it worried me.
No, I was definitely in a stage of my life, which is probably my entire life, where when Tom Cruise comes out with a movie, you see it. It's an obvious.
Yeah, you have to. So I was watching War of the Worlds, and to be honest, I didn't watch it all the way through. I just watched most of it, but I started to, later that night, couldn't sleep, nice, humid Wisconsin night, and I'm laying in bed thinking about War of the Worlds. And the way that movie begins, it's about Tom Cruise. He is a bad father, and then the aliens come, and then at the end of the movie, the aliens, they die because they weren't ready for the climate and the Earth's atmosphere, essentially. So they just die out. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that ending.
Okay, that's what I'm pretty sure the ending is. I was thinking like how War of the Worlds is about the arc of Tom Cruise and his relationship with his kids set to this backdrop of this alien invasion. But I was thinking of other movies that ended where the protagonist didn't kill or solve the problem. Like that he didn't figure this out. He figured his relationship out. He just became a protective father.
Yeah, the movie is very small, really. It's just about like their journey, right? Him and his daughter.
Which I thought was awesome, interesting, a little crazy. And I actually have been trying to think of other examples where movies end where the protagonist doesn't save the day, but rather saves their relationship, which is the more important thing. But I'm just saying for the sake of a movie, usually you see a Tom Cruise thing happen where he's like, yo, I just climbed up on this alien. Granted, he fights off aliens, but like, big picture, he doesn't save the world.
It's an unusual movie structure.
It is an unusual movie structure. Can you think of any other movies off the top of your head? I should have warned you because if I couldn't think of any.
Yeah, because off the top of my head, no.
Okay.
I mean, like, does something like Raiders of the Lost Ark count? Because he doesn't defeat the Nazis. He actually loses at the end, but the Ark kills all the Nazis.
Yeah, but I think he's clever enough to like turn your head, and then the Ark kills everybody, and he's knowledgeable.
Yeah, his ending is still like very closely tied to the MacGuffin, to the problem of the world.
It's just an interesting movie and structure to think about. That's all.
Yeah,
that's all I got to thinking. And
do you think it's successful?
Well, so this is the other thing about it is I remember first seeing it and being like, wow, that movie is a ride. Like I loved it. I love Spielberg. I love Tom Cruise, but I don't know if it's successful. Like I don't. Yeah. I'm afraid to say that it's not because I love the movie.
I mean, I'll say I've only seen it once, which is unusual for me and Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
And
that is unusual. That says everything.
I think it says a lot. And I remember being bored by it. And whether or not that's related to him defeating the aliens or not. Because that's the thing that's definitely a trap we always fall into as writers. And we get this note constantly from executives. It's like, can there be bigger world stakes? But I feel like if I wrote War of the Worlds and ended without Tom Cruise solving the world problem, the first note I would get back is like, can he solve the world's problem?
Yeah.
And maybe the answer can definitely be no. So I don't think my problem with the movie was that. I think it was just I was bored for other reasons. So, I mean, that's the thing about writing is everything can work if it's just done well.
Damn. All right. I've got one other thing. I'm going to move on. I'm gonna present this in more of a fireside chatty kind of way.
Ooh, I love fireside chats.
Little old school. I have a friend who's a writer, and before the strike, and he was kind of having some momentum, a younger writer coming up. He had momentum. I think he had maybe either sold or optioned something. Things were going in the right direction. They were trending in the right way for him. And like over the last 6 months or so, even kind of before the strike happened, I guess he started to go on a rocky relationship with his manager. And during the strike, it's gotten even worse, where the manager isn't very responsive, and he's basically just stressed that he is upset with his manager, especially with like the momentum he had, but he's fully aware that he can't do anything with anything right now. So what advice would you give to someone right now who might be struggling with their representation in this climate?
This might not be good advice, and other people may have different advice, but I don't know if the climate matters. Like, if you're unhappy in your relationship, why stick around? Like, they're literally not doing anything for you during the strike or not during the strike. So what does it matter if you fire them now or after the strike? Literally, what does that matter? So I would say, yeah, find someone else. And it's interesting because my thought had been that managers and agents aren't taking on new people right now because of the strike. And I think that's actually more of a case-by-case basis than I had assumed, because I was actually on the line at Disney and started talking to an agent. And I was like, oh man, you must be doing nothing right now, right? And probably taking on no new clients. He's like, actually the opposite. I'm having a lot of meetings with my clients to talk about strategy, to talk about what should you be working on now and prep for the strike to be over.
Wow.
Who do we want to target when the strike is over, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, he is reading new people because that never stops for him. But I've also talked to agents who are like, yeah, everything's super slow, not doing anything, not reading new people, can't do anything. So it's a case-by-case basis, but I think it's almost always a case-by-case basis anyway. So long story short, leave.
Can I tell you one last thing? Because I've been struggling with my spec, and what I justified and started to tell myself, the lies that I've been working through is I was like, you know what? Everyone's going to have a spec coming out of the strike. It's okay that I don't have mine. It's going to be flooded. The entire industry is going to be flooded with specs.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but also finish your spec.
Yeah. Okay, those weren't that like the most exciting this week's in writing, but two things that were on my mind.
Those are great. Can we then transition so smoothly into spec check?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I also have not made a ton of progress. If you remember last week, I was so excited. I was like, I got notes back from Writers Group, and I had rewritten the entire first act when I got home from Writers Group, was my last spec check. So this spec check, I just started, so it's been a week. I just started going back into the document yesterday. And I texted Josh and Dave, friend of the podcast, Go buddies. I'm going to do the Jeff Howard outline process, which is, Jeff talked about it on our last episode. And I didn't do that at all. I opened my outline, so jazzed to get into the outline process. And then I reread it and was like, I just want to write this. I don't want to fucking do Act 2 and Act 3. I don't have that kind of, I'm excited to get into it. And so I started writing yesterday, and I managed to write a few pages, none of which I like, by the way, which is so weird because I was so excited to write it. But as I got into it, I was like, God, this is boring. So I'm excited to rewrite it because I think that's where the excitement will come from. But that's where I am. I'm a few pages into the actual script. I think what I'm going to do is write Act 1 to just see how my characters feel and talk and live and behave and what they care about.
Sure.
And then that will help me. And then I'll probably beat out Act 2 and Act 3 before going. I mean, I have to because I don't know where I would go otherwise.
Wow.
So that's where I am.
Listen, I'm not happy you're not making progress because misery loves company, but I'm making no progress. I suck at writing a spec right now, which is what I love. The truth is, and I'm just kidding. I want you to finish yours. I took something on where I've been editing some videos for someone for social media, and I was helping out in something that has occupied a good majority of the last 10 days of my life. That's my excuse.
It's a good one.
It's a great one. So that it's just my brain's been in that territory, but I've been just thinking and thinking and thinking. But something coming out of the Jeff Howard interview and something you and I talk about often is writing for what the audience wants to see. And like if you're coming at it from an audience perspective, which is kind of counterintuitive to if you're like, well, where's this character coming from? So I've been going back into a lot of I've been thinking a lot about how can I write these moments where they're still kind of character based, but like what would an audience want to see in this moment? Which I don't know if that's going to work or not. And again, I'm like fighting that urge because that doesn't seem right.
There was a writer's room situation where I remember very clearly where we were like, we don't know what happens in this episode. What happens in this episode? And we had all these ideas and none of them were any good. And then finally someone said, well, what do we want? What does the audience want to see happen here? The audience wants to see this character get with this character, or they want to see this character fight in this particular way. So then we started realizing, okay, like this is where the excitement is. Let's write to what's exciting. And that helped us break through what we wanted. So it's a super valid way of thinking about it.
Okay. I'm just going to have a bunch of cool shit in my script that doesn't really add up.
What if you turn it in and it's like the greatest thing you've ever written?
Like, oh my God, why is she doing karate here? And then she's like a banker in the next scene. Like, what is going on here?
Doesn't matter. It's amazing.
It's great. That's what I wanted. I think what you want to watch is that. Anyway, that's the update. I promise to you and to the podcast world, I'm freaking getting back into this spec. And you and I are brainstorming a spec right now as well.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah. We got this. Not worried.
Yeah. All right.
Shall we get into the opening of Spider-Verse across the universe?
Yeah. We chose the opening of the Spider-Verse because of how crucial and important openings are in any movie or screenplay. And I think we both loved this movie, and we both knew that it was a really good opening, and we thought we were going to do the first 5 minutes, but it ended up being the first 20 minutes because that is essentially the opening of this movie.
Yeah.
But just bigger picture, it's always really important to look at like the opening sequences to your favorite scripts or favorite movies to see how it sets the tone and lays the groundwork.
I know, and it's nice to get back into a breakdown of sorts to kind of, I don't know, it just stretches your brain a bit and inspires you, and you learn so many things just instantly. So yeah, last night we both watched the opening of this movie, and I was texting Josh. I was like, wait, do we just do it to the 5-minute mark, or are we going for the whole cold open, which is, it's about 20 minutes. So we watched all the way through and by the way, these are nothing but spoilers, so please go see Spider-Verse Across the Universe. It's so good. So we watched all the way through when Gwen Stacy is at her decision point of whether she's going to stay in her universe or jump through the portal and join this elite squad of Spideys.
Yeah.
This is such an interesting opener, too. It really stands out as I rewatched it as an interesting version of how to open your movie. So basically, before Miles Morales ever really enters the story, we get the kind of Gwen story, which is obviously such an interesting way to open your movie about Miles Morales.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely a version of this movie that still opens on Miles and starts as the movie does when we get into his story. And then suddenly Gwen Stacy enters his world. She explains basically the entire opening of what happened to her, but she explains it. And maybe you are visual with it and you show kind of flashbacks and stuff of what she's describing. But that's definitely a version of this movie that could exist. But instead, they decided to open with Gwen Stacy. And I'm sure that was partly a marketing decision because I know they plan to release a Gwen Stacy spin-off movie and they want people to get super excited for that. But like, let's talk about it just as a story strategy, I guess. Like, what do you think of opening it on the secondary character instead of the main character?
I mean, it worked. I thought it was awesome that they did this because it really is. It feels like the first act almost, or no, up into like an inciting incident for her arc. And they just, it was so smart because, and I know we're going to get into this, but, it starts on this high note with her drumming and everything, but she gives exposition of her and Miles, and then it almost tells her story again of, oh yeah, that's who Gwen Stacy is. Like she's just kind of talking her way through it and who her dad was and who her Peter Parker was. And then it gets, I liked it. It works obviously, but like, I don't even know if my brain would go there if I could figure this out.
Yeah. I almost wonder if it came later in the writing as a solution to something. Mm-hmm. Like, I wonder if they wrote the movie as normal. Miles Morales is how we open the movie and we're in his POV. And then suddenly Gwen Stacy comes in and she gives all this exposition and you're like, wait, this is so much heavy lifting to have to do in the middle of the movie that like really slows the movie down here. So what if we front load a lot of this information? I wonder if that's kind of how it came about, because it feels like kind of the main story reason for doing this, if I were just taking a guess, is to set up Spider-Man 2099 and his whole deal, the guy who is played by Oscar Isaac, and to make his introduction a fun one, which again, it makes it so it's not exposition heavy when you get this information that he leads this group of Spideys. In fact, his story about that gets cut off by Gwen because she gets so bored by it. Mm-hmm. So this is a big exposition moment of who this guy is, and she cuts him off. But we still get enough to know simply that he is the leader of an elite group of spider people. Mm-hmm. We also get that he comes from another dimension, and he says that he is here specifically to clean up the mess that Gwen helped create with Kingpin's collider in the first movie. And there's a great moment where the Vulture is like, what are you guys talking about? Yeah. Like, shut up, which is definitely like a trick writers use, because if you've never seen the first movie and you have no idea what they're talking about when he says, I'm here to clean up your mess from the Kingpin collider situation, the Vulture is there to be your voice if you've never seen the Spider-Verse movie. And it kind of tells you like, it's okay, keep going. It's okay if you don't know this information. Just keep going with the story. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting trick to have another character in the scene be like, what the fuck are you talking about? It just helps someone, because otherwise if I'm watching that and I've never seen Spider-Verse 1, I'm like, why the fuck? I'm so lost. Yeah. What are we talking about? But when another character says, what are you guys talking about? I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, you can laugh at it.
It's okay if I don't know. Yeah.
Just to put a quick little side note to this is I watched the Lego movies recently. And I've seen all of the Lord and Miller movies, and obviously they were producers on this. And that's like a staple of, I think, of like kind of their tone and their sensibility is always calling out really obvious things, and they do them in such humorous ways, but it's exactly what you're saying. It creates a funny moment, but it allows you to be like, oh, okay, I'm with that person. I have no idea what's happening.
Yeah, there are plenty of times we've been in the writer's room, which is so interesting, where we've been like, man, the solve is too easy. Like, for example, if we're not smart enough to come up with a more complex solve for how character A and B get out of a sticky situation, so we just have them like find the easy solution. We're like, well, we can't think of a better solution. How about we have a character say, this seems too easy? And then you like make a joke out of it, right? And then the audience kind of forgives you. So yeah, it is an interesting trick. And it's funny that you noticed it in their other movies as well.
Oh, for sure. They do it in Lego movies and everything. It is wild that like this Spot character that happens later after the opening isn't set up as the main villain in the beginning.
Right.
It's so, there's so much going on, and this is balanced so well that I feel like most other scenarios would introduce Miles and Spot.
Well, actually, that's such an interesting point, because it feels like the actual movie's villain is 2099, right? Like, he's the ultimate movie villain. So you are introducing him in the opening. But what I love about it, and what's so clever with sort of a consequence of starting the way that it did, was the introduction to 2099 is fun in the sense that we really like him when we meet him.
Yeah.
And the fact that he ends up being the true villain of the movie, but when we meet him, he's quippy and he's brave and he's capable and he's a leader, is a really interesting place to start him. Because it gives us so much room to grow into him being a villain. But also when Miles meets him later and Oscar Isaac starts spouting his kind of villain monologue, because we liked him so much in the opener, we are listening to him. We're empathizing with him as an audience, because he's not just this sort of nameless, faceless villain. He's this guy that we liked ever since he came on screen. So I think those are kind of the main reasons why it feels like story-wise, they might have started the way they did.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Yeah.
And you don't need to focus on the spot villain.
No. Okay, let's get into kind of the nitty gritty of the breakdown itself. So we'll take this kind of section by section. So we open on Gwen Stacy. She's doing kind of her version of what has become a joke over the Spider-Verse, which is the VO of like talking directly to the audience, right?
Yeah.
But she says, let's do things differently this time, like so differently. Which I love this line because A, it tells us this movie is going to be very different and not what we expect. But it also is in her voice because she says, like, so differently.
Yeah.
Which I just like. It's just a very little small detail. Then she proceeds to tell the story of Spider-Verse 1, basically. Like how she had this friend named Miles, how Miles had a hard life. But there's this really great runner in her story where she constantly repeats the words, and he's not the only one.
Mm-hmm.
Which I loved because it created this idea automatically that her story is just as valid. It's just as complex. It's just as interesting as Miles is. Which is important because if we're going to watch 20 minutes of an opener of a movie we thought was about Miles Morales, we need to know that this person that we're in this movie with, Gwen, is worth watching. And so she continues to say that, which I think helps us.
Yeah.
And then one phrase she has, which is, he's not the only one who like felt these things, kind of launches us into Gwen's true opener, where we're experiencing the movie through her eyes. And then she says, if you think you know the rest, you don't. I thought I knew the rest, but I didn't. And this line is super awesome because it's something we've talked about a couple episodes ago where a character just flat out reminds the audience like why you should be watching and caring about this movie. Like in Indiana Jones, which was the example we used, where Brody says, hey, this quest is super dangerous. No one has seen this relic in 3,000 years. This mission is impossible. But Indiana Jones is, of course, going to go after it anyway, and that's the adventure of the movie. So here, Gwen is telling the audience, you think this is just another Spider-Verse movie, but you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There's a mystery out there that you don't expect. And I love that that line like helps us lean into the movie a bit.
Yeah. Also, in this opening, it sets up what I think is Gwen's arc. She's in a band. She's going off on her own. She's drumming. She's getting emotional. And then she quits the band. And she's like, I have no band. I have nobody. I am all alone.
Yes.
Spoiler alert, she forms a band at the end of the movie, and I feel like that is so that sets up right off the bat. You know, it comes in on a drum, like boom, 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 and so very important.
It's so important, and she's so alone, and she even has this line, which is a big transitional line in the opening, where she says, "In this line of work, you always end up a solo act." Mm-hmm. But you're right; the last shot is her surrounded by this band of Spideys. Mm-hmm. It's just so cool. But when she says that we always end up a solo act, it kind of launches us into Gwen's origin story of how she became a solo act, right? Like we see Peter Parker. I kind of want to hold on this scene for a second because I thought it was really interesting. The part where you see Peter Parker pushed to the ground in a school hallway, Gwen protects him, and then Peter, who is sick of being bullied, drinks this vial of green stuff that we know can't be good. And then it goes into prom and you sort of hear the whole story of how Peter turned into the lizard. But everything that we just like those beats we get in 3 shots. It's not a full scene. It's really interesting. So like the first shot is Peter getting pushed down in the school hallway. The second shot is Gwen getting in the bully's face. We see Peter in the background behind her. He looks ashamed. And then the third beat is Peter in the same clothes as he was bullied in, drinking this green potion. Mm-hmm. And it feels like this may be just a little detail, but like Peter wearing the same clothes really helps the audience because it shows basically direct causality, right? Him being in the same clothes means, okay, it probably happened the same day. He's fresh off being bullied and hating being bullied. He's going to drink whatever this is, so this can't be good. Yeah. So we sense all of these context clues and the visuals of the scene. And I want to highlight that for a second because ultimately when you write and you produce your own stuff, these are all tricks that you can use to get information across to the audience in a more succinct and simple way. Because I think a lesser writer-director could have made an entire meal of this scene. You could have written an entire scene where Gwen talks to Peter after he's been pushed. Peter admits, I'm sick of being pushed around. I want things to change. Yeah. But you don't. You just get it in a shot. And I think that's great.
The music that's played when the reptile Peter Parker attacks the school prom, it is such a somber kind of tone. Usually, like, you know, in contrast to moving, not to jump ahead, but with The Vulture, it's like this intense action thing. But when we're getting the Gwen moment, it's like the tone of it is so much different, and it's, you know, very reflective of how she's feeling. But
yeah,
I love
that's great.
I love the point that you just made about the clothing. And
yeah, I think small tangent that's related. I told you yesterday that I read randomly the first 2 pages of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Goddamn right.
And it's so interesting because that whole opening is iconic. It's one of the greatest openings of all time, the greatest introductions of a character of all time, because Indy doesn't talk. You just see him tracking through the woods. We don't even see his face. You just see kind of parts of his body. And then finally he kind of turns on one of the guides who's about to shoot him, grabs his gun out of his hand with his whip, and then steps into the light, revealing his face for the first time after, like, I don't know, like 5+ minutes. But in the script that I read, which was clearly an early draft, Indy did a lot of talking in the first 2 pages of the movie. But all that talking got whittled down to what we know today as the opener, which is just visuals. So again, it's a good reminder, the Gwen opener here and Indiana Jones, that you can tell a lot through visuals without dialogue.
I love it.
Moving on. Gwen is now at the prom. Gets attacked by the lizard. I actually hadn't registered necessarily the music, but now that you're talking about it, you're right. Even though it's an action scene, the music is sad.
Yeah.
Right? Because and that's also a trigger for you to let you know this is a terrible transformation that has happened.
Yeah.
Can I move on to what might be my favorite part of the opener?
Go.
Which is when Gwen returns to her dad.
Oh, yeah.
So sweet. Okay. And just little things were done in like, you could see how you could write this scene and just improve all of your writing. So
I'm going to say one more thing before you get into that, because we're moving on from the prom.
Yeah.
When she walks into the prom, she looks really nice. She's dressed up. She looks like I don't want to say she's like some beautiful character, but she looks like she's
like a punk princess.
Yeah, she looks very nice. And someone's like, "Hey, Gwen," and she like waves and says hi to them. And there is a very clear difference between like that Gwen before Peter Parker has died to the post Peter Parker. Like when we meet her, she's just kind of like angry and aggro, and then when she kind of does that little flashback, she's all, "Hi, how's it going?" You know, she's still nice.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay, sorry, the moment I cut you off.
No, it's a good transition to Spidey Gwen in this scene when she returns home to her dad. Dad's cooking dinner. He says he caught a break in the Spider-Woman case. And he says this hoping it will cheer Gwen up. Yeah. Obviously, it doesn't. And they argue. And the blocking here in this scene is so great because Dad is standing at the door. His body language is very open. It's very loving. He literally has his like chest kind of like facing her, open to her.
Yeah.
But Gwen is across the room with her back to him. And she's kind of like hunched inward a bit. So you automatically, regardless of dialogue, if you just muted it or you didn't understand English, you get the immediate sense that Dad wants to repair this relationship, but Gwen is sad and she's closed off because of course she's keeping secrets. And one effect that this has in the story is that you naturally feel bad for the dad, just simply because of how he's positioned, right? Because he wants kindness and openness here in his body language, which makes you kind of feel for him, but Gwen is resisting him. And then they have this great moment where he says, "I don't want to fight." And he says, "Are you too punk rock to give your old man a hug?"
Yeah.
And before he can even get the word out of his mouth, she rushes across the frame and she hugs him. And it's so sweet. And you love both of them and you're rooting for them.
Yeah.
And I think that is super, super key. And I want to highlight that for a second in terms of writing lessons. And the first writing lessons is the blocking. I think blocking is so important in a scene. And while you definitely don't need to highlight the blocking, do the direction of every character in every scene, when it's very key, like in this scene, I think you absolutely are within your rights to write the blocking of the scene. And I know we get a lot of advice saying, like, don't do any of that because that's the director's job. But there's ways for you to tell the director how this scene should be blocked or like what the emotions are in this scene. Like you can say something like, for example, Gwen's dad follows Gwen into the room, standing at the door, open and hopeful he can make Gwen smile. Gwen ignores him, packing a bag without looking at him. Just that, like just that to me is like a writing lesson of the power of blocking. You can just say that and you get a lot across without dialogue.
Damn.
The second piece.
Steal that.
The second piece is, I think, flipping the script on what a family argument can look like, because I think usually as writers, we try to find the most dramatic scene possible. And the most dramatic thing feels like two people who are fighting, who are mad at each other, and they leave that scene unresolved. That's more dramatic, right? And that's our job. But this scene, and basically the entirety of Ted Lasso, I think is a good reminder that you can have conflict but also show love and complexity of emotions, and that doesn't take away from the dramatic conflict in a scene. In fact, I feel like because they hug at the end of their fight, it's so satisfying. It just makes me love these characters even more, and again, root for them. And that's such a key part about writing, is you want the audience to root for your characters to succeed. And I think this scene absolutely does all of those things, and I love it so much.
I agree with everything you said. It's so perfect.
It's so good.
That hug is so crucial to their relationship, and then how impactful the end of her opening is, when which we'll get to. But I love it because it just to me, I was like, this shows that she's really needing that connection. She needs someone to talk to. She doesn't want to be this lonely person, this lonely band member. She needs someone, but she can't even talk to her own dad. And now, like, there she is. She hugs him. There's the connection. And then he has to break away. He has to break away and
go after Spider-Woman. Yeah, that's such a great point, too, because I feel like I tend to not like teenage girls in particular when they're written, because they're just punk.
Yeah.
Like, they just have attitude. And you're supposed to understand that they do want a hug, or they do want connection, but they're just too asshole teenager to bother. But this scene gives you both. It gives you a teenager who's struggling, who has an attitude problem, who can't talk about her feelings, but who also is loving and wants to. So, like, this is the kind of teenage girl that I love seeing written, which is more real. Like, I've definitely had fights with people I loved and then hugged them afterwards. It's a real situation. One
last thing.
Yeah.
Let's just say her dad dies at the end of her opening.
Okay.
Like in a, like, if it was the Uncle Ben type thing.
Yeah.
Then I could see it working where they just fight. Yes. Her dad's like, "Can you give me a hug?" And she's like, "Not now, Dad. I need some time." And then if he dies, then she's living with this regret.
Yes.
Maybe?
Like the Tobey Maguire
one. I'm just trying to figure out in what version her not hugging her father it might work, because it pays off so well in just like at the end of the sequence, or at the end of her opening, because of what she wants from him, when she's like, literally like, "This is who I am. I'm your daughter," and we know that he loves her. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
Oh, I'm getting so emotional. So sweet, so sad.
Okay.
You're absolutely right, though. That's definitely a version.
Yeah, but
okay.
Yeah.
Let's launch into what we've been waiting for, which is the fight.
Right.
At the Guggenheim, which I think has a 3-act structure.
I think so too.
And I think we get like what we expect from a Hallmark Spider-Man fight, right? You get like all of the jokes. You get the kind of Peter Parker version of shit talking, where she's cracking jokes while fighting. You get the Spidey acrobatics. She comes in kind of cocky, going toe to toe with the Vulture. And she's not really getting her ass kicked because it's Act 1 of the fight, but she's still not winning.
Right.
And then, right as she's about to be killed, Spider-Man 2099 comes in and kicks Vulture's ass. Mm-hmm. So we are immediately impressed by him. And that feels like the break into Act 2. Mm-hmm. You have a new character, a new kind of dynamic.
Yep.
Okay. And then, and please keep me honest if you don't think these are the act breaks.
I agree. I just want to add one more thing in to just to add to your argument of this being an Act 1, is she sees the Vulture. It is the Vulture, right? The Vulture.
Yeah.
Yeah, she sees the Vulture and she's like, "Let me guess. You glitched and all of a sudden you ended up here." And he's like, "That's exactly what happened to me." You know, like, and it was kind of funny, but also it gives us exposition of the setup and a reminder of what happened in the last movie and what is still currently happening across all of the multiverse.
That's a great point. Yes, it's still keeping with what the problem of the movie is. Yeah. well, it's introducing the problem of the movie, I guess. Up till now, we haven't really talked about glitching and portal jumping and all of that stuff. So yeah, now it's like, oh, okay, now the movie feels like it's really starting. The problem of the movie has been reintroduced.
Yeah.
Then Act 2, you get 2099, kind of starts getting his ass kicked. And now we have Gwen and 2099 have to work together against the Vulture. That's clearly too much of a threat for just one of them at a time. And the Vulture actually manages to beat both of them at the same time, which is what prompts 2099 to call for backup. And then you get pregnant Spider-Woman, flies in on a motorcycle, slams into the Vulture, knocks him down. And you kind of have a similar moment to when 2099 entered the scene where she's just a total badass.
Mm-hmm.
That feels to me like the break into 3, maybe?
Maybe. Let's keep talking it through.
Okay. So then I would say the Act 3 is 2099 brings them kind of all into the fight. So now all 3 of them have to battle the Vulture. And then something I think really interesting happens, which kind of becomes a plot turning point, where in the Act 3 of this fight, pregnant Spider-Woman wants to recruit Spider-Gwen to their Spidey verse, but 2099 doesn't want to. And when she asks him why, he says, "You know why," which is, holy shit, there is a huge mystery going on that we didn't even know was happening. It becomes the J.J. Abrams mystery box thing, right? Where now I have a new question. What the hell does he know about Gwen that we don't?
Yeah.
And then here, the music starts to change because the Spideys start to lose, which is like your low point. So I guess this is still Act 2. This is like the low point of the fight. And maybe that huge mystery beat is maybe the midpoint of Act 2. It's like a big turning point in the fight. So this becomes the low point of Act 2, where the music changes, the Spideys are losing, people are fleeing like crazy, and we get 2099 kind of in midair over the Guggenheim. He's about to bite and inject poison into the Vulture when a cop helicopter causes a new problem. And now our heroine of the entire movie, and especially the opening, finally gets to shine, because now it's been the 2099 show for a little bit. And now the helicopter is plummeting down through the Guggenheim. There's a bunch of innocent people who are going to die. So Spidey Gwen has to save the day by stringing a bunch of webs across the Guggenheim to catch the helicopter.
Awesome.
And then 2099 and Spider-Woman, they jump in to help. So all of their powers combined kind of save everyone. And then kind of the sort of denouement of the action scene is the Vulture's all tangled up. He's caught. Great. That part's over. But then 2099 looks up at Gwen, and she's in this kind of epic pose. We're shooting her from below. And he says, "That's what I was going to do." Which is super impressive because he's clearly the leader of all these Spideys. He knows a lot about Spideys. And Gwen is just as impressive as this guy.
Yeah.
Cool. Like, as an audience member, I'm super in. I love her.
Yeah. I'm just invested in everything you're saying right now.
Yeah. And by the way, I think that's a really cool way to make your hero seem a certain way. So, like, I'm going to sound very pretentious for a second.
Do it.
But something I learned from reading Tolstoy was that, I warned you, was that, like, one of the best ways you can understand another character is by seeing them through someone else's eyes who's in the room. So, like, if you want your character to seem awesome or impressive, you have someone else comment on how awesome and impressive they are.
Yeah.
Conversely, if you want them to be a bumbling idiot, you just have someone else in the room react that way to them. And so I think this is something we can definitely use as writers, and they do it here to great effect.
Strong Tolstoy coming in hot and correct.
Okay, that's it. That's, I think, the 3-act structure of the fight.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Okay, so basically in this opening, which I think we're just assuming everyone's seen this movie, but like her father then comes and he holds a gun on her and this is what's I think is really important, is she like goes to shoot a web at him, but she's out of webs, which is a very organic moment because that could feel forced in a different scenario. But since she just used all of her web to save all of these people, like she used a lot of webs, and it made all the sense why she wouldn't be able to do this. Although maybe she could have jumped out of the way, but whatever. And then her dad comes up and her dad's like, hands up. And I messaged you this, how crazy that scene. I loved like the animation in this scene and the coloring and the contrast and everything. And she reveals who she is, And it's this really heart-wrenching moment where the father is like, he's conflicted, and then he's like, you have the right to remain silent. So he's going to arrest his daughter and follow the law rather than believe her. And now their relationship is completely fractured. This is the one person she had the connection with. Peter's gone. Now her father is gone. What the hell is going to happen to this woman?
Yeah, and they really hold on this moment for a long time, because you are completely wondering, is he going to put his gun down?
Yeah.
Is he just going to hug his daughter like they did before and say he understands everything? And they really let it breathe so that the audience is like, is he? He's going to. He's definitely going to. Right? Like, it gives you time to even like elbow your buddy next to you and be like, he's definitely going to. And then he doesn't. And that, I think, being able to hold for those moments, especially you have some leeway after a big fight scene to have it downbeat.
Yeah.
And that's, to kind of let the roller coaster come down a little bit. And they really use that time well.
Yeah, it is true, because you're watching it and you're like, well, he's going to just tell her to like, get out of here and we'll figure this out later. Or just escape, go out the back, or something to that extent. And he doesn't. Her own father, which is perfect, because then, and it also then, not to step on your toes here, but then it gives the Oscar Isaac and the pregnant Spider-Woman, she's like, tells Oscar Isaac, like, she has no one. What's his name? Spider 2099?
2099.
2099. She's like, she has no one. And then you can see he's a little conflicted, even behind a mask. Somehow they convey that he's conflicted.
I know, it's impressive.
Throws the thing. She's like, I don't know how to handle this. She's like,
and he gives her the option to like, tells her to join the club. Yeah. So your whole, and with that, it's so thematic, right? Like she leaves the band, and here's her chance to join a club. People who understand her, people who are not going to try to arrest her, who accept her for who she is. But then that doesn't turn out to be the right club either. It's not just any club she needs to join. She needs to join a very specific club of people who care the same way that she cares. And that's what happens at the end of the movie. And it's great. And they also, which I think is interesting too, is we hold on her moment of choice as she's holding the bracelet and then looking back at her dad caught in this cage. And we cut out to black before she actually makes a choice. But we do see like a look of determination on her face. So we kind of can guess that she's going through the portal, but we don't need to see her go through the portal. And to me, cutting out early in scenes can always make you feel more excited about it and can feel more epic. So that's actually a note we get a lot, is can we get out of this scene earlier? And I think is something that writers do need to pay attention to, because we have a tendency to, I think, want to close the loop, as it were, in every scene. If a character walks through a door, has a conversation, then he also walks out the door. It's like, you don't need to have him walk out the door too.
Yeah.
I know I don't mean that literally. I mean that kind of figuratively. So yeah, I mean, all of these things are just so many good examples of how to write.
Yeah. And then it cuts, and then you're into the Miles story. And then it's like that's like essentially the cold opening of this movie, which is 20 minutes. I looked, it was like 19 minutes and 59 seconds or 58 seconds, which actually made me wonder if they got the note that it needed to be under 20 minutes. and it's fantastic. It just sets up Gwen so perfectly. It creates mystery. You're what you were saying, the J.J. Abrams Mystery Box 2099.
And it shows you the problem of the world. Doesn't just tell you, because you get Vulture from another dimension pop into this one. So you get to see in action all of it. And that's, I mean, overall, just a really great way of showing how exposition can be delivered through action.
Yeah.
So good. So good. Thank you for suggesting this.
Hey, man. I'm glad we talked about it.
Made me realize what a horrible writer I am.
Yeah, for sure. I'm done. That's probably why I can't finish my spec.
We'll never be this good.
Well.
Oh, God. Okay. On that note.
Yeah, it's great.
Quote of the day.
Quote of the day.
Part of being a writer is getting yourself quiet enough and out of the way enough that the character can just speak. Callie Curry. Please remember to rate and subscribe. Follow us at ActTwoWriters for more awesome writing stuff. You can follow me, Tasha, at Story Thursday on Instagram and Threads, or on Twitter at Tasha 3.0.
I'm Joshua Hallman on Twitter, Josh Hallman on Instagram.
And as always, the Act Two podcast is a production of Act Two, a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. This episode was edited by Paul Lundquist.